And then John happened in year 23. And that one really changed my mind. At the time, I had been married. I had 2 very little kids at the time. I was promoted to a rank of battalion or assistant chief, right? And what that means is I was out of danger for the most part, meaning when you get to that level, you're not really going into big structure fires. You're more controlling what's going on that scene. You know, if there's somebody that's safest on that scene, it's the chief that's running the call, right? So I'd already taken myself out of danger, but it really changed my perspective in life. There was a few other confluences, which we're going to get to probably here in a few, but there were other confluences that changed as well. But I really realized that I'm not sure this is worth it anymore.
This is Andrew Petty is Dying, where we tap into the power of our mortality to become the people we were made to be and live the lives we were made to live. I'm your host, Andrew Petty, and I'm dying. I hate to say it, but so are you. When harrowing encounters with death are a routine part of your job, how does it change the way you live? On today's episode, my friend Tony Gonzalez helps us answer that question based on his 25 years of service as a firefighter and put the lessons he's learned to work in our lives right now. Tony retired in 2017 as a battalion chief in the city of Denver. His peers and colleagues scratched their heads in disbelief when he made the decision to retire. It's far from the norm to exit the fire service at that point in your career. But Tony's many encounters with mortality as a firefighter, one in particular that he shares in the interview, and others in his personal life had led him to dramatically reevaluate things. And he left the fire service behind at the peak of his career to double down on what matters most to him. He's never looked back. Tony is a native of Steamboat Springs, and after 25 years in the city, in 2018 he moved back to Steamboat with his wife and 2 boys to begin writing a new chapter in their story. Since 2001, concurrent with his fire service career, Tony has been co-owner of Garage Composites, the nation's largest consulting firm to the power sports industry, and that's his primary professional focus today. I met Tony through a mutual friend, and he soon became a member of one of the Graveyard Group masterminds I lead. In that setting, on a weekly basis, Tony and his fellow Graveyard Group members remember that they are going to die, but they're not dead yet, and they work on the things that matter most in their lives, today, because, quote, tomorrow never comes, and death always does. We talk a bit about Tony's experience in the Graveyard Group in this episode, about how consciously keeping mortality in mind with the confidential, compassionate, no BS support of 5 other guys helps him leave it all out on the field of life. It's been a personal pleasure to get to know Tony over the past year, and it's a special pleasure to introduce you to him today so you can integrate his life lessons and hard-won wisdom into your own life. Okay, so I want to start with a line of questioning that may or may not be on topic, but I just got to ask these questions because the little boy in me hanging out with a firefighter, as you were for 25 years, just is like dying to know some things.
Yeah.
And McGray, my 11-year-old, who you know, for probably 3 years, every day he'd get up and put on his turnout gear, and all day long he was living as if he was a firefighter. So I used to have a firefighter in training in my family, but you were one. So would you just indulge my curiosity about your time in the fire service?
Oh, absolutely. It's funny that you say that, the curiosity coming from a place of a child, because that's exactly how I got into the fire service. Is I was dumb enough to carry on your childhood dream of wanting to be a firefighter.
So from early days for you.
I can tell you exactly where I was sitting. It was Soda Creek Elementary School, old Soda Creek Elementary School, because the school has been completely redone and demolished, the old stuff. But in the 70s, homecoming parades were a big deal. The homecoming parade always passed by the junior high and the elementary school. All these floats were going by. I was sitting with a childhood friend of mine. I remember his name was Mike, sitting there watching these floats go by, and coming around the corner, here comes this thing that I had never seen before in my life.
And you're how old?
I am in kindergarten, Miss Barrow's class in kindergarten, sitting on the grass, watching Crisscross Applesauce, and this fire engine at the time, which I'd never seen before, comes around the corner with a bunch of guys hanging off it and bunking gears and helmets, lights flashing and the siren going. And I just remember looking at that going, don't know what that is, but whatever that is I got to be that. That is wicked cool. And so I always had a penchant for wanting to be a fireman, like from the time that was 5 years of age. Yeah.
Wow. And were you pretty single-minded in that pursuit all through the childhood years, just waiting till you get to the academy and do everything?
I was so geeked out about it that now this may not seem like a big deal, but I got so you get basic first aid, you could get an advanced first aid card. I got my advanced first aid card when I was in 7th grade.
Wow.
From a local lady who is no longer with us. Her name is Linda Cowan. She was on the paramedic division here in Steamboat. And yeah, I mean, I was that into it. I was building these first aid kits when I was in junior high. You know, it was, looking back on it, it's hilarious to look at that kind of stuff, but I was prepped and ready to go. I just needed an accident to happen and I was going to shine and become a firefighter. Yeah.
Like, I get why you would say it would be hilarious to look back on that and to think of a 7th grader making first aid kits. But on the other hand, to look at that and go, man, how cool is that you were locked into what you wanted to do at that age? That when it just triggered something innately in you. What do you think it was about it? Because you have now 25 years of fire service behind you. What do you think it was that drew you to the fire service with the benefit of hindsight? What it is about you as a man, as the kind of human that you are?
You know, I'm not sure that anybody wakes up, you know, in elementary school going, man, I can't wait to go be an insurance salesperson, right? I mean, and not that there's anything wrong with that for the insurance salespeople out there that are listening, but
nice, Tony, just pissed off a bunch of
yeah, right, exactly. I think, you know, you look at McGray and you see that he has this path that he sees in his head, and I believe what he believes, because it's what I believe, is there's something super intoxicating about. And you and I are about the same age, so you saw Emergency 51. You saw the Dukes of Hazzard. You saw Chips, right, on TV.
How is Dukes of Hazzard included in that list?
Daisy Duke.
Okay, gotcha.
Only. No, but I mean, back in the 70s, a child of the 70s was death and destruction on Chips and Emergency 51. And so what was intoxicating to me, and knowing me, and you know me well enough, I'm super type A. I mean, super type A. I'm the guy that if, you know, you round up 50 people and say, here's your problem, I'm the first guy to pop out and say, okay, let's find the solution. So I think it was intoxicating that I think there's a lot of people that are drawn to danger and destruction and excitement. And, you know, there's people that skydive. There's people that go whitewater rafting. It's kind of all the same thing. It's just massive shots of dopamine. And I think every little boy to this day initially starts out saying, I mean, my boys, I have never push them to be firefighters. I don't talk about my job with them. I don't talk about it with my wife, but still, because my brother's a fireman, they see fire trucks. They're like, I want to be a fireman when I grow up. I want to be a police officer when I grow up. I want to be a soldier when I grow up. I think that is just innate in men. And that's not saying men and women can't do that job, but as little boys, I mean, why do little boys wrestle? You know, and little girls don't for the most part. I think it's just a certain thing about the gender about that is we're drawn to being dirty and in danger and that kind of stuff. Again, not that women aren't, but that's just how boys operate.
Well, and for the listeners out there, either for yourself as you're considering kind of what you're made to do in the world and who you're made to be, or maybe you're a parent who has kids and you're observing, you know, just stay tuned to kind of the things that they seem to gravitate toward, whether it's playing with fire trucks or doing something different, as a clue to the kind of human they are and the path that is especially made for them later in life. And sometimes it's hard as a parent, I think, when the path that you see your kid being interested in isn't necessarily one that like you're interested in or you think would be all that useful or productive. And I just want to encourage all of us parents to reserve judgment and to instead use curiosity as we see those interests begin to emerge in our kids and see what it's about and nourish those things and fan those flames. Mm-hmm. I want to know what one of your favorite feel-good, heroic firefighter stories is from your time in the fire service. We're not talking yet about the grim stuff, but about the successes, the triumphs.
Well, I mean, I know you probably want more meat on the bone, and I can give you one because I can think about one that stands out, but I can just remember here in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, the first time that I actually got to put on my bunking gear and my helmet. And
bunking gear is turnout gear, right?
Turnout gear,
okay,
yeah. You know, the gear that you put on as a firefighter.
Yeah.
The first time I was allowed to get on a fire truck and go to a real emergency scene, and that was back when the fire station, the main fire station, was on Yampa. And you had to come out Yampa, go up 9th Street, come on to Lincoln on Main. And I just remember sitting there, rolling down my hometown in the city fire truck, and it was beyond surreal to me, and it was freaking epic. And I just knew I knew that that's what I was going to do with my life. That moment cemented that you are exactly where God placed you to be, was right here on this fire truck doing what you're doing right now. So
what a cool feeling that must have been.
Oh my goodness, it was. And I had that feeling so many times throughout my career. But I guess if you're looking more meat on the bone, and I think this is the question that you're looking for me to answer, is I think I had been on the Denver Fire Department maybe 3, 4, 5 years at the time. And we had a structure fire come in, 10th and Washington. I remember exactly where it was. I was working on Tower 1 at the time, which was in smack dab in the middle of downtown Denver. We got to the scene of this fire, and it was, the first thing I got to tell you is firefighting is nothing like the movies that they show you in Hollywood. It's just not that way. It doesn't pan out that way. It's not as exciting like they make it every single day, but this one was as close to Hollywood as you get. You know, we pulled up to a 4-story apartment complex on Capitol Hill in Denver. You know, the first thing I see was a lady on the 4th floor hanging out the window with flames coming out the entire 4th floor and below her. What was super cool about it was you take a small boy from a small town in rural Colorado that didn't make the best grades and, was just kind of an average kid in life, and you transpose him into that scene. And I knew exactly what to do through my training, through my mentors. There was no hesitation. I can't even think about what it was that I was doing. It just happened. Grabbed a ladder with my partner, laid it up to that building, extended it up 4 floors, climbed it, plucked her out of that window, carried her on my shoulder all the way down.
Carried her down the ladder.
Yeah.
Holy smoke.
And tended to her, gave her first aid, put her in the back of the ambulance, and off she went. And, it was a fantastic time. But at that moment, I wasn't thinking about that because we had all kinds of other stuff to do, right? So went from that into the fire, help search and put out flames, that kind of stuff, Went back to the station, sat down to have some dinner, was eating dinner, and my lieutenant came up to me and he said, "That was a great grab, kid." He goes, "Do you realize that had you not been there, she would have died?" And I thought to myself, I just never thought about it that way. I just thought this was awesome. It was exactly what I wanted to do, go to fires. And, my lieutenant was like, if you were not in that place in the world at that time, a human life would have been gone. And that was probably the first time of several where you're just like, yeah, that's what I was put here to do. So
what a cool leadership moment from that lieutenant to stop and help you appreciate what had happened.
Yeah, super cool moment, super cool guy. And here's one of the things that you and I talked about on the phone.
Yeah.
He's not here anymore. Yeah. So, you want to talk about mortality, that's going to probably come into play. But yeah, it was a great leadership moment. He was a great guy. And good Lord, did he teach me so many things in my career.
What did that moment where he helped you connect the dots between your actions and a saved life, what impact did that have on you moving forward in your career and appreciating the value of what you're doing, or any, if it didn't?
Well, first and foremost, what you're always hoping for in the fire service, or probably in any job that you have in life, I guess it's happened to me other times, but more importantly in a job like that, is you're always looking for the affection and praise of those that you respect the most. Your mentors. When I could have a lieutenant or a captain or a high level chief tell me, "Good job, kid. That was awesome what you did," or "You did good work right there." It was fantastic for me. And how I carried it through my career was, there's super big ups in the fire service, and there's more downs. There's way more downs than there are ups. What things like that did for you is made you realize at the moment that you needed it most, which is a lot of those downs, is that you are actually serving a really cool purpose, which is without you here, because so many times you lose sight of that vision, whether you're an insurance salesman or you build houses or whatever it is that you do, you tend to lose sight of the things that you do. And I guess the lesson I would say is, there's a lot of times when people would ask me, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" or still like, "Hey, what did you do?" or "What do you do for a living?" I would tell them, "Oh, I'm a city fireman." And they would tell me, "Oh my goodness, that's awesome. Thank you so much for your service." And to me, I always said back to them, "Well, it's just my job. And what do you do?" "Well, I'm a mechanic." "Well, cool. Thank you for your service, because without a mechanic, I can't fix my car. So I take it to a mechanic so I can get to work to do it." It's this It kept perspective of everybody serves a purpose.
And it's interesting because that seems to be the mindset of everyone who we civilians would call heroic in their line of duty. Everyone has, whether it's a soldier, a firefighter, a policeman, when they're thanked for their service, say, I'm just doing my job, because you don't think of yourself as heroic. And yet we, of course, as civilians think otherwise.
And it's so unheroic. It really is. And that is not just me being humble. I can tell you there is no real soldier, police officer, firefighter that would look you in the eye and go, yeah, it's pretty badass heroic. It truly was. I woke up, I took a shower, I put my uniform on, and I went to my job. It was no more important than the person who sells me my insurance. It was just what I did for a living.
I think that's probably part of why we civilians see it as heroic, is because what you say, just getting up to go do your job, could result in loss of life and limb to you and others that you love. That's, in my book, one definition of heroism. So you'll just have to take my word for it. I think you guys and gals are heroes, and you're just gonna have to deal with that.
I think it was a boon. I think it was a total scam, as in I was getting paid to basically go to an amusement park every day, the greatest show on earth.
Yeah.
So yeah.
What do you remember most fondly from your years as a firefighter in retrospect?
Hands down, bar none, camaraderie.
Camaraderie.
Yep. Just you and I have talked about this in the past as well, which was, I may tell you, hey, buddy, Andrew, I'd die for you. I'd take a bullet for you. And that's a metaphor for, hey, we're close friends, right? Yeah. And I'll be here for you. My brothers in the fire service truly would. And there were instances where they show you that at the cost of maybe my life and limb, I will make sure that you're not alone in your final moments. So I will be here with you. So yeah, it was the camaraderie. It was the brotherhood. It was knowing that you had people that were looking out for you, not only at the fire station when you put on your uniform, but when you went home and your wife was in the hospital after surgery, they would take care of you. The wives take care of the wives. And it's a really cool community that I miss. But it was already kind of slowly going away towards the end of the career, as it was. Not the brotherhood, but just moving up into different ranks and stuff. It was different.
A little bit separated from the field and where some of that camaraderie is
Yep.
built. Yeah. Well, I know a lot of men and women that would crave that quality of camaraderie in their daily lives. And of course, you and I met through a mutual friend, and then you joined the graveyard group that I started with, in your group, a handful of other remarkable guys. I wonder if you'd compare and contrast the camaraderie that you gained in the fire service with those men and women with the camaraderie that you're experiencing and building with the guys in the graveyard group, who are not fellow firefighters. You're not thrusting yourselves into life-threatening situations every day, and yet there is a bond and a camaraderie that's developing around a different way of being together. What are the comparisons and contrasts there?
So the comparison is obviously it's super hard to find a tight-knit group, and you hear that a lot from people that were in the military and then get out, or people in the police force and get out. It's hard to find that kind of tight-knit group of community that would do that kind of thing for you. And so the graveyard group for me was a means to an end of not only meeting new people, but forming a group of people that you could depend on and talk to. And then, the most important part about it is it allows me to not only know people, but it allows me to now vomit forth my problems, or whether that's personal or professional. And I'm around people that are not like-minded, which is what I really like, because in the fire service, there's a lot of groupthink. And in the fire service, there's not a lot of understanding when it comes to emotion, right? You don't show emotion, because at the end of the day, that could have a detriment to you in how you operate on emergency scenes. So you keep emotion pretty bottled up unless you're, off duty at home with friends. Here, what's really cool about the graveyard group is I've met 6 people, yourself included, that really aren't afraid to tell me. What I love about it was they're not afraid to tell me, yeah, you're just jacked up. Like that's all on you, dude. That's not the world. That's not your job. That's not your wife. That is you. And they give me a dose of reality that I need. So I cherish that. It also allows me to have individuals that are, starkly contrasted to each other. We got wing nuts, we got ranchers and cowboys, right. We got computer nerds, we got everything kind of covered. And so you get a perspective in the graveyard group that you just don't get from other places. And I think the last thing I would say is that, we talk about men specifically, and they're almost not allowed to emote, right? And I admire that about women. Women freely just, if they're having a bad day, they can cry, they call their friend, their girlfriends, they have a glass of wine, and they allow themselves to be so vulnerable, which is a quality I admire so much about women. And they solve their problems, even if it's just, I just want to be listened to. You don't need to solve my problem. Just listen to what I have to say. I'd never be like, Andrew, call you crying. I'd grab a bottle of Merlot and come over to the house, and you just be like, you know what? You're great, buddy. And you just keep being you. And it just doesn't happen. So the Graveyard Group facilitates an ability for me to just open up and be supremely vulnerable, and then have people not only empathize with me, but hold me to task when I need it. And like the best example I can give is just recently, you shared on a text message that, my wife was kind of in trouble. She was in the hospital. We were kind of in need. And instantly, all 5 of them texted me on a personal basis. What do you need? Can I make you dinner? Do you need help with the kids? Do you need help with whatever it is? It was immediate. How can I help you? Yeah.
One of the similarities I see between the camaraderie you gained in the fire service and the camaraderie that's available through an experience like the Graveyard Group is a shared purpose. Not that the fire service and the Graveyard Group share the same purpose, but within each of those groups, there's a shared and clear purpose. In the fire service, it's to save lives.
Yep.
And structures and do real work that matters in real ways.
Yeah.
In the Graveyard Group, we've gotten together to say, hey, we're all going to die.
Yep.
And we know that we kick the can down the road often too long in the most important areas of our lives. Let's not do that. Let's meet each week, remember that we're going to die, and compel ourselves to take action now on the things that matter most.
Mm-hmm.
And so each group has a very clear and specific and shared purpose that, and I've only led Graveyard Groups for men, so I can only speak to the men's perspective, but I think it really feeds that part of a man's soul that, and again, we're not talking, the gender thing out in the world these days is such a confusing question sometimes. And so, we're obviously 2 dudes and we don't know what it's like to be a woman, but I just know in the heart of this man, speaking of myself, and in your heart resides the desire for a mission, and for purpose and for intent. And in my experience with the Graveyard Group, what better mission than leaving it all out on the field of life, and taking seriously the things that matter most to us. And so any listeners out there who don't have a group of men they can do this kind of thing with, please make one, create one, find one. We're doing it. You can do it. If you want to join a Graveyard Group, let me know. You know how to contact me, because cool things are happening. Well, thanks for comparing and contrasting those 2 things. I think the pursuit and attainment of camaraderie is rare these days. In a world that's more connected in some ways than it's ever been before, we live lives that are more isolated than ever before, especially because if I want to look at Tony's life on Facebook, I see Tony's great, vacation when his kids are smiling and wife's smiling and they're down in Mexico and all looks well. So we think on Tony's side of the fence, all is well, when in fact, all might not be well.
That's so true. And you hear about that stuff, that Facebook fatigue, which is true, because I don't take a picture of my wife after we've had a massive blowout and she's absolutely pissed off at me and we don't talk for 3 days. I don't take that picture of her ignoring me in the room, being like, you know what, get out of my face, and post that being like, doesn't this suck here? Everybody take a peek. We put our finest moments, and we even create our finest moments. We contrive them sometimes of, okay, everybody get together. The thing I can think about most is I took my family to Tokyo last February, right before the pandemic just totally interrupted life. It was harder than hell on that trip, because not only did I have my wife and my 2 boys at the time that were 7 and 8, but we were in a country that doesn't speak your language. And we're talking hyper language. You can go to Mexico and you can order tacos and beer and sit on a beach just fine. When you're in Tokyo, a lot of them speak English, don't get me wrong. But there's idioms that are totally different, and kids running all around. It was hard, but I posted a lot of pictures of how great it was just by like, hey, or take a picture, guys, get next to this thing. And yeah, that's true, man. That Facebook fatigue is real because everybody's life looks perfect.
And they're just not. Life is not perfect. 2020, if anything, has been a great representation of that, a reminder of that.
One thing I do want to say about that Graveyard Group that to me leaves an impression is the concept of how you've tweaked I don't know, you call it a men's group, a self-help group, whatever it is, but the concept of we are dying, you're going to die at some point, stop kicking the can down the road. Because that's truly what I was doing was, oh, this will all fix itself at some point. Little did I know I'm working way too much, not connecting with my kids like I wanted, not working on my marriage like I should, and not stopping to smell the roses. It is constantly something that is a problem of mine, is not stopping and just looking and going, this is great.
Beautiful. Well, I'm glad the Graveyard Group has played a part in helping you to do that.
Yeah.
I think I want to pause a little bit longer on your time in the fire service and touch on some of the more challenging parts of it. And just ask this question. With the benefit of hindsight, how did your encounters with mortality in the line of duty as a firefighter paramedic affect you?
Wow. So that's that's a big one that I think any emergency service provider tries to unravel at some point. So how did it affect me?
Yeah, what are you aware of in terms of how it's affected you?
Well, I'm aware of this. I'm aware of the fact that people die all the time from so many things. Graphic trauma, to old age, to cancer, to homicide, to taking their own life. So to me, the concept of somebody dying, there's not a lot of empathy there. And the reason why is because I have muted that so much. You are taught so early to mute those things that it just doesn't really affect you much. So the first thing it taught me is survival when you see so much death, without being too graphic, from start to finish, from stillbirths in front of you that you've delivered all the way to somebody that's 100 years old in a nursing home, you see death all around you. And so there's a very muted sense that you got to step back and you got to take your hand off of that, because if not, you'll hurt yourself. So when somebody dies, it's funny that you and I were talking about this beforehand, which is, yeah, we didn't see it coming. Rob Riggs said that. You're 100% correct. And when it does happen, it typically doesn't shock me like it shocks the rest of the world. So that's the first thing it taught me.
Now, is that a net benefit? Is it neutral? Is it a net loss for you to have so much experience with death that it's not a shock to you? How would you appraise that?
It's both, meaning it's a value to me, because whereas somebody else in the world, you, my wife, my mom, possibly, it would be devastating to face something like that. To me, it's a benefit to me because I can pragmatically walk through life that moment, that day, the next week. I recently lost my father, and it hurt really bad, but I was functioning and I was able to put it away, which is the detriment.
So the first word that I'm hearing is sort of a resilience in the face of death.
Yeah,
you can carry on. Yeah.
Yeah. They teach you to function. They teach you to function when you see people that are dead or kids that are hurt or multiple mass casualty incidents. They teach you to function, and you got it down as a fireman, a police officer. You got it down when you can calmly assess the situation in front of you and look at it muted, stunted. That helps you.
Can I pause on that real quick?
Yep.
Because it's one of the reasons this podcast exists, is because my perspective was that we are often too surprised when death shows up, as if to say, like, who are you and what are you doing here? When in fact, that was always our destination. Mm-hmm. I mean, death was always coming for all of us. And I think the fact that many of us live such insulated lives from death, not all of us, of course. I mean, many of the guests on my podcast, including you, have not at all lived insulated from the reality of death. But many of us, just in the regular world here, are fortunate on the one hand to not have to confront death very often.
Yep.
The shadow side of that same coin, the flip side of that same coin, is that when it does show up, we don't know what to do with ourselves. Mm-hmm. And we can be undone and have a very difficult way finding a way forward. And so that to me seems like, because I think you're getting ready to talk about the downside of that resilience, but it seems like that's the plus side, is that resilience to having a matter of factness about death's reality.
Well, the positive side is, like I said, you can compartmentalize that instantly. It's just a facet of how your brain works after doing it so long.
And that's a good thing, because we can't have a firefighter flipping out when they're trying to do their job.
Yeah, man, that's not good. And so the downside is that there's a little room in your brain that you pack full of those things. At the end of the day, though, you can't unring a bell. You can't not see what you've seen. And so at the end of the day, you start understanding that you have a dysfunction. And that dysfunction can come in the form of, alcohol, drugs, domestic violence, overeating, you name it, overexercising, whatever it is it's going to come out. It just does.
What is coming out?
Just your dysfunction of, you have to deal with that stuff at some point in some manner. Just because you're not dealing with it right there doesn't mean that you don't lose sleep over it in a month or 2 years, or doesn't mean that you don't have breakdowns. It doesn't mean, my form of, and I've told you before that I just abhor the initials of PTSD. I don't like that there's a label associated with it. And I don't know, there's no great way to just say that you're jacked up. And so my jacked upness isn't that I have nightmares or I wake up screaming or that I sit in a dark room that's cold and I isolate myself. My darkness is grumpy, crabby, stubborn. It is that I can be really great, for the night, and then I wake up and I'm just in a really bad mood and snappy, that kind of stuff. And so, I'll make no bones about it. I've seen many people to work through issues that I have and the things that I've seen, not necessarily in the public, but more about my close circle of friends. And I told you before, just an inordinate amount of death around me. It has left tremendous scars on the inside of me that rarely come out, or rarely that I have addressed in the past. And I still haven't addressed even a myriad of it. But the downside is it paints everybody that has been in a theater, whether that is a theater of war, whether that is a theater of the streets, chasing bank robbers, or whether that is seeing a lady hanging out of a window that you have to go save. It most certainly messes you up inside.
This may not be an answerable question, but the idea of like dealing with it, what is the it that one would need to deal with based upon trauma after trauma after trauma? Like if the grumpiness and the mood swings that you can experience were resolved, what would you have addressed?
I think we talked about this in our graveyard group, which is I have this inordinate sense that I have to control everything. My wife, my kids, our habits, the house. I don't know. There's a sense of perfection in me that has to be met for my happiness. It is me losing my temper with my children. It comes out. It is not being able to. Well, I know for a fact, just knowing myself, my whole life is I'm very good with the English language and talking, but the dark side of dealing with it would be don't talk to me. I'm very good at being able to succinctly describe what I want to describe, but I don't want to talk about it. And you should know not to approach me, right? Because, my wife will tell me like, you're extraordinarily difficult to talk to. My mom will tell me, I don't know how to approach you. Yet you see the gift that I was given in this earth was that I am well-spoken, but don't talk. It's yin and yang.
Interesting. Thanks for that. You were with people often who were either themselves close to death or had just lost a loved one. As you think back on that span of 25 years of being in those situations almost on a daily basis, which really is mind-blowing to think about, like, if I have a hard day at work, I might come home and say to my wife, gosh, I was working with this client, just didn't quite know where to go. And okay, so I'm a little bit, but it's very different than coming home and saying, a family of 4 died in an accident and I had to extract their bodies.
Yeah.
And that being a part of your job.
Yep.
What did you learn about how most people relate to death through those experiences? And the follow-up will be about how most people relate to life. But start with the death part, kind of as you look at the span of 25 years of experiencing people in those critical moments.
Well, I think it goes back to that Rob Rigg statement, which is nobody expected this. I loved this one. This wasn't supposed to happen.
Yeah.
This doesn't happen here.
And you heard that.
Oh, yeah. This wasn't supposed to happen. What's wrong? What happened? What happened? What happened? No, he's just sleeping. Wake him up.
Yeah.
This isn't supposed to happen here. And I thought inside my head, well, where's this supposed to happen then? If it doesn't happen here, this is supposed to happen.
Yeah.
This is really how life works. We're not born to live our whole life. We're born to die. Make sure I clarify that, meaning when we come into the world, we instantly start dying, right?
Yeah.
And so what I noticed was it just shocked most people, you know? You're sitting there having Christmas dinner and your grandfather keels over and has a heart attack. It's not supposed to happen on Christmas, but yeah, it really is, because that's just what happens sometimes on Christmas. So the shock and the disbelief is something that always amazed me.
How are you able to see it differently than those people having those experiences? Well, because of your accumulated experience?
Yeah, because you just sit there and listen, I don't want people to think that every day I went to work, there was just dead bodies piling up everywhere. Or, like I said, this isn't TV. There were times in the fire station where you wouldn't leave the fire station. You'd cook 2 meals, you'd sit around looking out the windows, and you'd feel trapped because there was nothing going on, right?
And give each other back rubs.
Exactly, among other things. But yeah, no, have pillow fights. Tickle fights, that kind of stuff. Yeah. There were times where you didn't do anything. But the accumulation of death was just normal when you're tied to the 911 system. And, there's 39 stations and like almost 75 apparatus in Denver. You're going to go on death calls. It's just going to happen. And so again, it was just, why did I react to it? Again, the protection mechanism that is instilled to you within the first couple of years. I won't even go into the part that is like a TV show or the trauma that you see, but it would drop your jaw. And I always tell my wife, who I never shared anything about what I did at work. Never did I tell her what I did. But I would tell her, like, you wouldn't believe if I told you. You wouldn't, you'd be like, there's no way that happened. It's impossible. But it does. And so that's the reaction that shocked me is that I'll walk into a situation and I see something going on in front of me that is involving death in some way, shape, or form, and people are just absolutely mortified and shocked and surprised at what they're looking at. But as a firefighter, I've seen this so many times before. Of course, and this is horrible to say, it's graphic, but of course they hung themselves. They were obviously depressed, and this was their last thing that they decided to do, and they hung themselves.
Yeah.
Happens all the time.
So shock and what didn't compute to those people in those moments computed to you because you'd been exposed to it so many times and had become accustomed to the reality that many of us work hard to separate ourselves from, which is the inevitability of death.
Yeah. And there's one instance where I remember years ago when Princess Diana died, and my mom and I were talking on the phone, and she's like, I just feel horrible. I feel blue and I feel depressed. I feel so bad for her. And most importantly, I feel so bad for her 2 children. Her 2 boys are going to grow up living without their mother. And I said, what's the difference between her and somebody here where I work that they died in a fire or they died in a car accident and now the kids don't have a mom or a dad? It wasn't, there was nothing impressive about what I was looking at, unless it was truly uncommon that I saw, wow, you could die that way too. Never thought about that, but there it is right in front of my eyes. So yeah.
What about your observations about how people relate to life, generally speaking, from your experience as a firefighter in all of these critical situations? And I hope that question makes sense. If nothing comes up, we can keep moving on, but I'm just curious what it brings up for you. Yeah.
How they relate to life is, I think, again, ties back to, they think it's forever ongoing. And that I always tell my wife that, like, people that are standing behind those badges, I really experienced what life is. Like, I really saw life. And it's good that the general public doesn't experience real life. And what I mean by that is, we go about our life, and sun came up and I get to take my kids to school and we go skiing, and then we make a nice dinner and we watch a movie. Yeah, that's life. But the seedy underside of life that is true life is that people suffer every day. People are in bad positions sometimes. People find themselves on the wrong end of something that wasn't supposed to happen to them. But guess what? It did. That is a jadedness that you'll hear from cops, firefighters, soldiers. Yeah, that's just how it works, man.
Yeah.
I'm glad my wife and my mother have no concept of that.
I'm
glad. Yeah. Oh yeah, man. I'm glad that they will only have to experience that a few times in their life. But I want you to think about the kid or the teacher or the tenant or something of a house fire, right? For you, Andrew, that I pray to God that that's never going to happen to you, right? A house fire or an active shooter in a school. those people can be messed up for the rest of their life because of one incident that happened. I want you to think about the people that are behind those badges that go to that thing cyclically, just at different addresses. You just start to see things that are a little bit more skewed.
And so prolonged exposure to that can have some pretty challenging effects on people. From my naive perspective, the outside looking in, there is something that I covet, though, about what you described as jadedness, just sort of creating a thickness to my skin about the realities of life so that I'm not surprised when those bad things happen. It's something that on one hand seems sort of desirable, just as a way of moving through life with less susceptibility to the crap that happens. Am I naive to say that? I mean, is it naive to, it almost sounds like the kid who watches a war movie and goes, oh my gosh, I want to go to war because it looks heroic and there's a soundtrack in the background. And then he gets to war and is like, I want to get out of here. This is awful.
Thickness of skin, I would equate to calluses. You have to get those calluses somehow. Mm-hmm. By walking, by swinging a hammer. So you have to experience the things to get the thick skin. So the thick skin's super cool in that it protects you really well. It insulates you. It's really bad in the fact that underneath is just tons of years of experience that come with that. I've really tried to figure out the bright side. The bright side is that
I was just going to ask, what are you grateful for?
What I'm grateful for is it has nothing to. Well, I guess I'm grateful for, in some way, shape, or form. There were a lot of people that would come to me or anybody that was on a scene, right, and just say thank you. Thank you so much for showing up. You walk into somebody's house at 2:30 in the morning, they called because their loved one is having difficulty breathing. The wife opens the door. First thing she says, thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. You leave. Thank you so much for coming. You put a fire out. Thank you. Thank you for doing this. So on that side of life, as I realized I didn't stop enough to smell the roses, there were a gazillion people that looked at me and said, thank you so much for being here. And I would typically give them the thanks. No, I'm just doing my job. That's what I'm here for. Mm-hmm. Thank you for allowing me to be here. Right. So the bright side is that you really made a difference in somebody else's life. I took that for granted. The other bright side is that I was honored enough to have been chosen by something that was bigger than me to allow me to do that job. I always say that firemen don't find that job finds you. It'll find the right people to be doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I got to do something that I always say that I got to imagine if you walk up to, most men and quite a few women now, right, in the fire service, if you were to say, man, I give you the opportunity to be a big city firefighter, what do you say? They jump at it. And so I was honored enough to have actually been able to say, I put on that uniform and I did my thing. And most importantly, I made it out the back end alive. And so, the bright side is it was the greatest show on earth. It was so damn cool to do the things that you got to do, no matter how horrific. It's just somebody's got to do it. And I'm really glad that I was part of that screenplay. It was cool.
That's so cool for you to be able to say after all of the trauma that came along with that. And I'm going to go ahead and say it. Thank you for your service.
I was just doing my job.
Because I genuinely mean that. I mean, I'm just so grateful that there are people who are made for that kind of work and are willing to do that work over many, many years at great personal expense and cost, without an expectation of even expressions of gratitude. Really appreciate that. You mentioned the other day, and you've alluded to this conversation already, that as you anticipated having this conversation today, you realized, gosh, there's been a lot of death in my life, maybe for more than the average bear. And what encounters with mortality have been the most impactful for you, and why? Because the fire service is the low-hanging, easy get. Of course, you were around it all the time.
Yeah.
So, but what for you have been the most impactful experiences of mortality, and how?
So when I told you that I had an inordinate amount of death in my life, you and I had a conversation, I think at your house a few weeks back, and I just started talking. You poured me too much scotch, and I started talking, and I just started to piece together some things that I never thought about. And the first thing that I would talk about is, take away all the civilian casualties that I had to deal with. And then let's just I can break it down to just the friends that I had in the fire service, the inordinate amount of friends of mine, close friends of mine, that have killed themselves that were firefighters who took their own life. Insane. And I started.
How many are we talking?
We're talking upwards of 6 or 7.
Holy smoke.
Yeah, man. Crazy. And I didn't, and like I told you, that first lieutenant, his name was Steve Magana. He was a longtime mentor, longtime friend. I mean, he lived with me after his first divorce, and, he ended up taking his life 10 years ago.
How many of those do you draw a hard line back to the trauma experienced on the job? How many of those had other things going on that complicated it?
I say it was a mixed bag. Some of them had their own demons, had their own demons that maybe had some of it attributed to the fire service, but then, whether it was within their own lives or marriage or problems with their own issues in life, it was that. Because I don't know. I don't know that the normal, I got to get a different insurance salesman quote, the normal bar owner. I don't know if the normal bar owner has, 6 or 7 of his friends that have killed himself that own bars as well. And so I got to imagine that the fire service has attributed a lot to that. So that was one thing. I learned about death in the fire service pretty quick, right out of probation. One of my captains on probation hung himself, a year and a half into the job there. So there was an inordinate amount of suicides in the fire service. And then I went to the line of duty deaths. The line of duty deaths that I experienced were 5, which is kind of a lot for a fire department of about 1,100 people that service about 1 million civilians. That's a lot of line of duty deaths, and I just think, unfortunately, I was at the right place at the right time, meaning that it was just some people's time to go. Which brings me to the last one, which you and I have talked about, which is I had lost several what I would call coworkers, and I don't want that to sound callous, but these were people that I knew them. Again, you're talking 39 stations, 1,100 guys spread out over 3 shifts and hundreds of or tens of square miles in the city. You didn't know everybody, but there were times where I broke bread with certain people, and there were even some of the guys that necessarily I didn't get along with, right? We weren't friends, but they wore the same uniform I did. They spoke the same language that I did, and they went to the same dangerous calls that I did, and they died in the line of duty. One drowned, one trying to save a lady, one died in a fire, one died of homicide on a scene, one died of a suicide. Long story short, it was the last one that really hit me. So I had people that I knew, some were good friends, had 2 acquaintances, friends of mine that died in the Twin Towers. But it was the last one that affected me the worst, which was in 2015, one of my best friends. And, we talk about that community again. John Whelan was one of my super closest friends, and we worked at the same station together. And his wife, Sherry, was friends with my wife, Amy. And there was a circle of about 5 of us that we used to travel the world together and break bread together and watch Broncos football games together and go out and party and go to dinners together. So we were super close friends, and he was definitely one of my closest friends on earth. He fell through a roof at a fire and died. That was a huge change in my life, because I had been in the fire service for 23 years at that time. And I had experienced not only the trauma and death of civilians like we discussed, but I had gone through all those suicides, and then I had lost line of duty firefighters that were friends of mine. Gosh, and that just brings up more, which is a good friend of mine, Donnie Young, Denver police officer, was shot and killed. I forgot Donnie. Sorry about that, Donnie. But Donnie died as well. So you go through all of those, and then John happened in year 23. And that one really changed my mind. At the time, I had been married. I had 2 very little kids at the time, which Cruz and Diego were born in 2011, 2012. So they were, 3 and 4 years of age. At the time, I was promoted to a rank of battalion or assistant chief, right? And what that means is I was out of danger for the most part, meaning when you get to that level, you're not really going into big structure fires. You're more controlling what's going on that scene. If there's somebody that's safest on that scene, it's the it's the chief that's running the call, right? So I'd already taken myself out of danger, but it really changed my perspective in life. There was a few other confluences, which we're going to get to probably here in a few, but there were other confluences that changed as well. But I really realized I'm not sure this is worth it anymore.
Was it a tipping point?
It wasn't like something that was, well, yeah, maybe it was because you accumulate so many calls in your life, right? And then there's something we haven't even talked about, which is the routine BS calls that you have to go on, which populate more than 50% of the calls you go on. False alarms, burnt toast. Everybody likes to use that ever cat out of a tree type of thing, which gets done, still to this day. Chipmunk in a wall that I actually froze with a CO2 extinguisher and pulled out, so you things like that.
You brute.
Yeah. Well, he lived.
Okay.
It just stunned him enough to get him so cold that you could actually grab him without biting you, and you throw him out on the lawn. He comes to and he runs away. But yeah, there's a lot of boredom involved there. So when you start getting into that routine, I think whether you're a chef or you're a banker or whatever, you own your own business. Insurance salesman, right? There's just a routine, and you get bored of the routine. It's how do you remain professional every day and come to work and show up, right? And then I had promoted to like I said, a higher rank in the fire service, which was way closer to the administration and the mayor, right? So you really have to start working for the organization and balance not working so much. Well, that's not true. Balance working for the guys and the administration. And my time on fire trucks was done. I was in my fire chief SUV going to calls, but so you lost a lot of that quote unquote brotherhood. You lost a lot of the camaraderie because when you strap on the white shirt as a chief, now you're the guy, you're the big boss. Right. And so I didn't lose a lot of my friends that were my friends because at work they, kept their head down and we would go drink beers or whatever, in our time off.
But the relationship changes. It became more complicated.
Totally changed. Yeah. And so you lose community.
Yeah.
And then I realized, and this is probably the first time I'm saying this, and I'm going to pass this along to some of my firefighter buddies, which is I started to look at who my peers were, who the administration was. Who were some of my bosses, and I realized that in my head, you don't have a clue what you're doing. And I'm not sure I want to work for you or work with you because I don't want to get into this political part of the job. And so I didn't like the position I was in. I had young kids and I was married. I had lost kind of touch with the camaraderie of the guys at that position. And then my friend John died. And I think I told you this. People always ask me, what's the greatest thing you've ever seen or done like you did. And what's the worst thing you've ever seen as a firefighter? People want to know that for some reason. And that to me is always like, that's a morbid question to ask a human being is what's the worst thing you've ever seen? And when people ask me that, I'm just like, you don't want to know. Like really, you're not prepared to find out what it is, the worst thing that I see. But this is a PG end of the story. The worst thing I've ever seen was, we're all at the hospital, about 70 of us in fire trucks and SUVs and family there after John had died in the emergency room. And his wife, Sherry, is a complete puddle, as we all are. And John's son, Jackson, is coming to the hospital, does not know a thing, just knows that he needs to get to the hospital. The neighbors are bringing him. And I grabbed Sherry and I sat her down and I'm like, Sherry, I know you're a wife right now, but in 5 minutes you need to be a mom because Jackson's coming here and you need to get your stuff together. And we walked outside the ER where the ambulances come in and I stood with her there and Jackson pops out of the car and Sherry walks over. And the worst thing I ever saw in the fire service was watching his face and hearing his scream after his mom told him that your dad's gone and he's gone forever. It was horrible. It was atrocious. And like I'm on the verge of tears thinking about it, but it was at that moment where I realized it is not worth it anymore. And it's a perfect confluence for me to move on because I made it this far in one piece. I've done everything that I wanted to do on this job. I've seen everything that I could see. There wasn't really much that I needed to see any more of. And I hadn't lost my passion. Like I think if there was a volunteer fire department here in Steamboat, I could easily go and strap the gear on and just go be a plain firefighter sitting backwards and poaching the calls that I want to call. But it's not that I was burnt out on it, but it was a perfect confluence of moving on and making that a portion of my life. And I told myself 25 years in a career is plenty good. Plenty good. You don't need to do 30, 40 years like some of these guys. And so I retired.
Thanks for sharing that story. I can imagine that that's painful just having to recount it again, and you feel emotional remembering his son's reaction.
Yep.
And it strikes me as a picture of how we humans react to death, because inevitably it's stripping someone from us that we wish was still here. And so on the one hand, it makes perfect sense that in our modern affluent world, our part of the world anyway, it makes sense that we would do whatever we can to insulate ourselves from those moments where we experience that heart-rending grief. We don't want death to happen. So I get that. And the problem is that we insulate ourselves so much that we don't know what to do with it when it arrives. And in the meantime, often we settle into mediocrity. We settle into this assumption that day will follow day will follow day. And the things that are good now will always be good. And regardless of what you think about the COVID situation, the whole world has had to adjust to a reality this year that I think has gotten us, many of us, by the scruff of the neck and just going, wake up, moron, wake up. Things can be good for a while, but stuff happens, and it can happen quickly and change quickly. And some people have lost loved ones to COVID or to collateral damages that have come about as a result. And I hope for any listeners out there, if you're asking yourself some of the deeper and bigger questions about your life, whether it's because of what COVID has done to the world over the past year or for any other reason, that you're willing to dig deep into those questions and to search for some answers to those questions. Because this life doesn't last forever on planet Earth as we know it. And you've got 2 boys and a wife that you love dearly, and they want you here, and you're pulling out your phone. What do you got?
Well, there's a song lyric, and I want to make sure I get it right.
You're not playing Tetris, right?
No, I'm not. Because I play this line in this song away because it fits exactly with what you're saying right now. And this is exactly what I think about when I think about my friend John Whelan. It's how quickly the sun can drop away. So it says how quick the sun can drop away. And Eddie Vedder's talking about, I'm spinning, how quick the sun can drop away. And he's using it for a lost love of his life, but it was something that was profound to me and I couldn't reconcile this. And I guess that may be why it affected me so much, is because every other death I could reconcile. Yeah, well, that's just what happens. Remember when I said, yeah, that's supposed to happen. And I went to the Rob Riggs school of, wait a minute, it was just yesterday I talked to him. I talked to him yesterday. He's alive. He's okay. This can't be. And it's just how quickly the sun can just fade to black and how quickly your life changes because of one event. And I don't know if I've told you this, but that event and that instance has been more painful to me than the death of my own father. And I don't care if that offends people and tell me that I'm wrong. And the death of my own daughter, stillborn, after 33 weeks. That whole event, that time frame of my life was devastating to me.
How did you get through it?
I crawled in a bottle a couple times. I've talked to you about that. I'm not an alcoholic, people, but that is a major source of abuse that firefighters, soldiers, and police officers tend to, because it's communal. We can hover around a bar and we can talk shop and we can medicate ourselves just enough to let our emotions come out, and it's safe, right? I found solace in my family, my wife and my 2 kids. I found community in my super close friends. Time heals all. Talked to a lot of psychiatrists, got on medication, name it. I did everything to get past it. I'm pretty well past it now, but I'll still find that 1 or 2 instances a year where I'm driving and all of a sudden I'm a puddle and I don't know why I'm crying. And yeah.
And that is a remarkable statement, that was more painful than the loss of your father or your stillborn daughter at 33 weeks. What is it that you think made that one that searingly painful for you?
So my father was expected, and it's my dad, but I just knew my dad was going downhill, and it hurt. My daughter, I think I put away. Don't get me wrong. It brought me to my knees holding your dead child that you had to deliver. I think I just put that one away, and I'm not sure I've reconciled that one yet. What made John so painful was, I think it goes back to that community. Not only had John and I best euphemism I could use, we went to war together. We did stuff together, meaning we saw those things that we see and we did those things that we did together. So there was a bond there. We had broken bread together. We had traveled together. We had told each other our most intimate secrets. I knew about him. He knew about me. He was just a great human being, a great being in my life, and somebody that I looked at as he was always my keeper and I was always his. And so
closer than a brother.
Oh, good God. I mean, to the point where I can freely say, right or wrong, that, yeah, it affected me worse than my father or my own blood dying. It killed me. It really did. I gave the part of the eulogy at his funeral, and one of the things I said was, whenever anybody dies, whether you're a jerk or not, there's somebody that's going to get up and speak and say, Andrew was the greatest guy on earth and had all these friends and everybody loved Andrew. It could even be untrue, right?
Everybody's like, they talk about the same Andrew?
What? Who'd they find and pay to do this? The truth of it is John really was that guy. If you knew him, he was your best friend. Everybody loved him. He was such a great human being. Pissed me off all the time, but he was awesome. And it killed me.
How do we who haven't experienced all of the traumatic events that you have in the fire service, and then all of the events outside of the fire service, because I think we've only scratched the surface of your encounters with mortality that weren't directly related to the fire service. What do we take away from what you've learned, what you've seen, what you've known, the pain you have experienced, so that today we live a little bit differently with the people that we love, prioritize things a little bit differently? What do we learn from your story?
That you're right. I'm wrong. Meaning the way that you act and react is right. The way that you should be shocked to people that die or face mortality, it's correct. You should suffer inordinately. You should have a tremendous amount of grief. You should be shocked out of your brains when your friend or loved one, or God forbid, somebody that's close to you dies. That's the correct way to go about it. You should wallow in your pain. There's that great, my wife and I were just watching 4 Weddings and a Funeral. There's that great poem by A.F. Oden that talks about, basically drain the ocean and sweep up the wood, because from here moving forward, nothing can ever come that's good. I mean, you should feel that kind of grief, right? And then, it's the cliche, because it is a cliche, but man, cherish everything.
Okay, so how?
So it's great.
Cliche because it stands the test of time. It makes sense. And everyone who sat on that couch where you are and told a story has said that. How have you made that a reality in your life? Because we haven't even touched on this other major artery of your professional life, which is the fact that you're co-owner of the nation's premier consulting firm to the power sports industry. You started doing that during your time in the fire service, and now that's your sole gig, and you guys are killing it. And in 2020, you've made some big changes about the way that you live and work relative to your consulting work, which had you on the road all the time. So you've operationalized some of this, I think. I mean, some of the learnings that you've captured, you've really operationalized in some major ways in 2020, especially. So what are you doing differently? What are you seeing differently?
Yeah, I bless COVID. I think it's the greatest thing that's ever happened for me. It's horribly frustrating, and boy, do I have a ton of fatigue from it and tons of mental stress, just like you and anybody else does. How do we do that? Go be with the friends that you say you're going to be with. Don't cancel that date. Put down your damn phone. That's something I try and focus with. Now my youngest kid breaks my heart, but it's a great reminder. Dad, let's watch the movie. Put down your phone. Put down your phone, Dad, right? Go out to dinner. Take that fun vacation. Don't work as hard or as much. And totally being a hypocrite right here because, I got this, me and my business partner, we got this big business that needs constant spinning of those plates.
But to your credit, I mean, you've put your money where your mouth is this year, and granted, travel wasn't as much of an option for you as it had been, but you've realized when travel was taken away, you've told me separately that it won't return in the way that it was for you once that's an option.
Never.
Because
from the time I was 21 years old, when I was hired as a firefighter, you got to remember, you go to work for 24 hours, sometimes 48 hours, and have 24 off. I've never been home in my home ever, even when I retired from the fire department, because I tell people this and their eyes get as big as freaking pie plates, which is I usually traveled anywhere from 40 to 45 weeks out of the year.
Oof,
yeah,
grueling.
Gone 2 to 3 days. My wife has never known what it's like to have me in the house except because of COVID. My kids have never known what it's like to have their father around all the time unless there was COVID. And so what it has taught me and what I would tell people is if there is ever a time to hit reset and have a complete paradigm shift of what you used to do, I can honestly say I will never go back to my same travel schedule. It doesn't mean I won't travel, but you're going to have to be pretty important or pay me a lot of money to get me to travel because I never knew what it was like to have dinner with my kids 7 days a week, right? I never knew what it was like to have the ability to go out and play with my kids whenever I chose to pick them up from school, to take them from school, things that I used to, and I never took it for granted. I always complained about it. And a friend of mine that's on the fire department said, remember when you used to complain about, because I was telling him, like, I'm so sick of COVID. I'm so sick of being in my house. I'm so sick of looking at a computer screen. I can't leave Steamboat really to go on a great vacation. And he goes, yeah, remember when you complained about not being at home and having to travel and being in a hotel room in Florida? Remember how that sucked so bad?
Right.
So maybe change your paradigm. Yeah, I just, I realize my dudes are going to start getting sick of me in about 2 and 3 years. And they're not going to want to hang out, and I'm just not going to miss any more stuff.
What has it been like to be home?
Stressful.
And I mean, and not, like in the enforced way, but I mean, What are you seeing differently? What are you appreciating differently now that you've been able to really have this time with your family?
I just really enjoy the mundane, bland part of life. I love going to the grocery store.
I love that you said that because I think that's a super interesting and valuable point for all of us to hear, that to live, quote, our best lives, which might be one of those catchphrases that's thrown around a bit too much out there and it doesn't mean much anymore, can mean the mundane things, that you're really present and aware and in the moment of the just normal comings and goings of life, passing time with those that you love, but really being there with those that you love. It doesn't have to be epic adventures with dad to be meaningful time with dad. I think any of us looking back on our childhoods would go, gosh, the most precious gift I ever got from my parents were not the big gifts from Santa. They were the gift of focused time and attention and just their love.
Yeah. Prime example. Diego, my youngest, is in Winter Sports Club. Well, they're both in Winter Sports Club, but Diego's in it quite more than Cruz. But every time I go to pick him up, small thing, I love to go drop him off, pick him up from skiing, hear how it was, how his practice was. Every single time I go to pick him up, when I go to grab his skis, he's like, Dad, can we go ski together? Can we go ski together? Well, I never have my ski stuff on because I'm cooking dinner or I'm working and I pick him up in between, webinars or
just
whatever.
Got done shooting the firefighter calendar for 2021.
I did that too. Yeah, well, the older fat guy with less hair calendar for sure. Tonight, I'm going to make sure that I'm in my boots and ski gear because I know he's going to come down off his final run and he will look at me and go, yes, we got to go ski together.
Nice.
So it's those kind of things. It's just simple stuff that I was never around for. I would come home. I'd typically leave on a Monday. I was gone Tuesday, Wednesday. I'd get off a plane at 10 o'clock in Denver. I'd get in my truck, drive to Steamboat till 1:30 in the morning, and they would see me again on a Thursday. And it started having a real effect on the youngest. When I started leaving before COVID, he was in tears and he didn't like it. And so
that's hard.
Just not going to happen anymore.
So again, a theme that everyone hits on, who I talk to in this podcast, is simply people. What matters most? People. It wasn't the work that we did, as important and as energizing as that can be. It was the people that we consider closest and loved dearest, who become the renewed focal point of time and energy and attention for those who have had life-changing encounters with mortality. And I know that putting in these reps, doing these interviews, and even as I contemplate the things that I'm going to share in the solo shows, putting in those reps has helped me on a daily and weekly basis now to operationalize some of that stuff without having gone through the same experiences that people like you have gone through. And I'm super grateful for it. And I mention that simply to say that without having had these experiences, we can still prioritize the same things so that when death shows up, and it will, we may, as Tony said, still be surprised and shocked and go through the normal grieving process, but we can look back, hopefully with many fewer regrets, look back and realize I did my best to put my time and energy, attention where it mattered most, with the people that I had decided to invest my life's energy in. And so I want to encourage anybody who's listening, even if you haven't had experiences like this that have impacted you in the way that they've impacted Tony, you could start today rather than banging out a few more emails at the very end of the day when your kids come home from school. You could close the laptop. Those emails will be there, and you could go talk to them about their day. You could go get ice cream. You could do that thing today, even if you didn't do it again tomorrow. But if you did it today, that would make a difference. So find some way today to make sure the people in your life are getting the attention and time and energy and focused love that they deserve, because those are the regrets that hit people the hardest when the Grim Reaper does come, is just realizing all the what ifs and I could have and why didn't I and this, that, and the other. And why don't we? Well, we all share the same human condition in the privileged Western world that we're a part of. It's easy to just think that one day is going to roll into the next. Let's land the plane there, Tony. Is there anything sticking out to you that we've missed today from your story that would be useful to the listener? Anything you want to offer in terms of advice, perspective, or suggestions as we close out today?
If you see an off-ramp and it looks appealing and you've thought about that off-ramp a few times, take the off-ramp. It was unthinkable for me to retire from the fire department. When I told people that I was retiring, 75% of them looked at me like, "You're what? Like, that's impossible. You can't be retiring. Like, you don't retire till you're super duper old." And then 25% were like, "You're an idiot. What are you doing? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." But I saw an off-ramp. I saw a good reason to take an off-ramp, and it was full judgment that I used to get there, but against my better judgment told me to stay the path and stay routine and keep doing what you're doing. I took the off-ramp. Super happy that I did.
How much was head? How much was heart when you were willing to take that off-ramp? Like, in your head, you knew it was right, or in your heart, you knew it was right, or both?
Well, I go back to me, that's an emotion versus logic conversation, head and heart, right? There's not an emotional decision, in my opinion, that's made that's good. It's all done with your brain. So logically, my heart was telling me, you're going to turn it in. You're not going to strap on this stuff anymore. And you're never going to be able to say again when somebody asks that, yeah, I'm a fireman, right? My brain was telling me it's dangerous. You're getting older. You got a family. You have a different source of income, and it's a better quality of life. You need to go. And I think that most people, most of my friends that are on that job, if they had an opportunity where they could transition after 25 years, I bet you most would. They would.
And so you used both. Your heart was beginning to whisper some things to you, and your head affirmed it. And that provided the rationale for you.
True story.
Yeah. All right, you heard it here, folks. If Tony the firefighter can do it, so can you. Tony, what a pleasure to be with you, man. And I really appreciate it. And I'm fortunate, of course, this isn't a one and done, that you and I get to spend a lot of time together. And
yeah,
some of you listening already know Tony, and you know the quality guy that he is. And I just have been so pleasantly surprised because you presented yourself as this hard driving type A when you first joined the Graveyard Group. And I thought, well, this will be interesting. But you have, in my estimation, shown yourself to be one of the warmest, most genuinely caring, compassionate, direct, no BS, has your back. We had Camp COVID here for a few weeks a while ago, and you were the first one to say, "Hey, we got your dinner tonight." And then a few nights later, "Hey, we got your dinner again. And what can I get you?" And, talk about not judging a book by the cover. You're a strapping dude, tough guy, do a lot of cool stuff on the stereotypically manly end of the spectrum. And then there's this warmth and depth to you that I've really continually coming to appreciate and see is deeper even than I thought. And so all of you who know Tony, I believe, would affirm that. And if you don't know Tony, I hope you do get to know him. Stellar guy. Thanks for being here and sharing vulnerably and honestly from your pain and your triumphs, and your story and how it is now connecting to your purpose, being the husband and dad that you want to be and that your boys need and your wife needs, and creating this next chapter. So To all my listeners, remember, you are going to die. There's just no doubt about that. What happens next, none of us knows, but you will stop drawing air and you will be 6 feet under or sitting on an urn on somebody's mantle someday, and that'll be it, as far as we know, of you in this life. But you're not dead yet. So get after it. Let today be the day that you do something different to get just a little bit different results in your life, so that when you look back on your life, whether that's looking back a year from now when you're on your deathbed or 30 years from now, you can say, I gave it my best to live the life I was made to live and to invest in the things that mattered most, and I'm ready to go. I have a simple formula for change. Insight plus action equals transformation, which is not the same as to say that change is always easy. But the anatomy of change is, in fact, simple. And you can take the first steps toward the change you want in your life today. What insight emerged for you from this conversation with Tony? What's just one thing, no matter how small, you could do today to put that insight into action? Don't worry about all of the steps that might be necessary after the first one. Just be sure to take that first one today. 1,000 different reasons will pop up why taking that action today is unreasonable or unnecessary, or why it might be better to think about it a bit more first, or get others' opinions, or do some more research. This is the voice of inertia, though, the voice of the status quo, whispering to you that it's not that big a deal to hold off on taking that step. That in fact, it might even be prudent to let your insight marinate a bit more first. And that voice in this moment is the enemy of the life you know you were made to live. If you listen to it, it will keep you right where you are, stuck in whatever unsatisfactory state you find yourself. Because it's less about the specific action you decide to take than it is about your steadfast commitment to act. Your resolve to do what you can right now to move toward what you want. My purpose as a coach is to help you live the life you know you were made to live. I can help you leave it all out on the field of life. Connect with me on Facebook or Instagram at Andrew Petty Coach, or email me at andrew@digdeepwinbig.com to learn more about Graveyard Group Masterminds, where we make time each week to invest in your life's most important work. Visit digdeepwinbig.com/The Graveyard Group. I'm so glad you tuned in today. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time on Andrew Petty is Dying.